So today we are going to learn how to solve quadratics by using the quadratic formula, which is right here. Now, in order to do quadratics or to do the quadratic formula, you need to make sure that your problem is in standard form, which means highest exponent to lowest exponent, so x squared, regular x, and then no x's, and then you will be able to use this formula. Now, the only thing that's really different about that formula is this plus or minus sign that we have not seen before, and that has something to do with square roots. So you don't have to write this part down, just listen. We know that the square root of 9 is 3 because 3 times itself equals 9, and that's what it means to be a square root. But the square root of 9 actually has two answers. It could be 3 or it could be negative 3 because 3 times itself is 9, but negative 3 times itself is also positive 9. So actually, when there's two answers like that, when we take a square root, we've got a positive and a negative answer, so we write plus or minus 3. Okay, so let's actually get some practice using this quadratic formula. I'm going to write ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 right underneath my problem. So that way I can see my a, b, and c values. Now your a value is the number in front of your x squared. If you don't actually have something right here, then that means you are dealing with an imaginary 1. My b value is the number in front of the regular x. That's a negative 2, so make sure you put that negative sign with it. And then my c value. My c value is a number that does not have a letter attached to it. Okay, so now when I am actually using the quadratic formula, it tells us x equals. When I start putting this part together, anytime that there's a letter, I'm going to replace it with a set of parentheses. So it goes negative b, so negative b, plus or minus the square root, and I make a long square root sign. Underneath it, we've got b squared, so parentheses squared, and the parentheses do matter, and it does need to be on the outside, minus 4 times your a value and times your c value. This entire thing divided by 2 times a. So I'm just going to point that out again. It went negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, this whole thing divided by 2 times a. And now we can plug in our values. Now, if b goes in my first spot, make sure that you put the negative sign with that b value. Same thing right here. My b goes here. I need to put negative 2. Now, next is my a value. That's 1. I've also got another a value right here on the bottom. And then my c value, which is negative 48. So now we're going to simplify this. And there's a lot that you can do in the calculator, and I will kind of show that to you as we go. But I'm also going to be doing a lot of this by hand because I know that quite a few of you cannot access the calculators. So whenever you see double negatives mean a positive 2. So we can do it like this. If you do have your calculator, you can actually type it in as negative 2, and it becomes positive. Plus or minus the square root. Okay, so I want to demonstrate why we need parentheses right here. If I do negative 2 squared, this is what we want. It's telling us negative 2 times negative 2. But whenever you leave the parentheses off, that is actually a different answer. So make sure that you put that there. That should be 4. Now I'm also going to do the multiplication here. I've got a negative 4 times 1 and then times a negative 48, which ends up giving me 192. Since it's positive 192, I'm going to put plus 192. And on the bottom row, I've got 2 times 1, which gives me 2. Now, one other thing that I want to do to this before I move on is I want to go ahead and add those numbers underneath the radical sign together. So 2 plus or minus the square root of 196 divided by 2. Okay. So now I'm going back to the front. Okay, so I'm going to take this number. In case you're a little bit confused, I'm moving back over here, okay, to continue this problem. Now what we are going to do on our next step, to go from here to our next step, is actually take the square root of 196. So if you didn't know where it was on your calculator, it's above the x squared button in blue. So you press second, x squared, it'll give you your square root sign, and you can type in 196, which is 14. So now what our problem is 2 plus or minus 14 this whole thing divided by 2. I want you to notice that when I took the square root of 196, I did not put the square root sign anymore. And now that we've finally got all this simplified, we are going to break this apart into 2 problems, because that's what that little plus or minus sign actually means. It means one of our problems is 2 plus 14 divided by 2, and our other problem would be 2 minus 14 divided by 2. So all I did one of these with the plus sign and one of these with the minus sign. So if I'm doing this by hand, 2 plus 14 is 16 divided by 2. Well, 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. That's my x-intercept. On the other one, 2 minus 14 is negative 12 divided by 2, which means that I have negative 6 for my x-intercept. So if I was going to write my answers, and remember when you write the squiggly brackets, this just means this is a list of my answers, we have negative 6 and positive 8. Now, if you are lucky and you do have your calculators, you can type this in all at once. So alpha y equals enter, 2 plus 14 on the top, divided by 2. When I hit enter, I got 8. Okay? Now, one thing you do want to be careful about, though, is do not type this. Okay? If you type it in like that without actually doing the top part first, it's going to give you a wrong answer. Okay. Let's get some more practice with this on example 2. So, I've got ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Excuse me. Okay. So that means my a value is the number in front of the x squared. Well, that's 2. My b value is the number in front of the regular x. Well, that's 3. And my c is the number at the end, the one that doesn't have a letter attached to it. My c is negative 2. Okay. So now when I am doing my quadratic formula, so I'm using this formula right up here, I'm just not writing it again. I'm going to go ahead and do it as the blanks. So we have negative our b value plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And I'm going to go ahead and extend this so it goes all the way across. This whole thing is divided by 2 times our a value. Okay. So now we need to plug in our values. My b value is 3, and on the quadratic formula, it has a b here and here, so I'm putting 3 in those first 2 parentheses. My a value goes here and here, so I've got a 2 here and a 2 here. And finally, my c value, negative 2, is going to go right down here. Okay, so we did that first step, and now we need to simplify. Now, when you only have one negative sign in front of the 3 like that, that just means your number is going to be negative 3, and you can drop the parentheses. If you weren't sure, you could type it like this if you did actually have your calculator, and it would show you that that is just negative 3. Plus or minus the square root, okay? Well, if I have 3 squared, that means 3 times 3, so that is 9. For the rest of this, I'm doing negative 4 times 2 for that first part, times another negative 2, which gives me 16. Since it's positive 16, we need to put a plus 16 right there. And on the bottom row, I've got 2 times 2, which gives me 4. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and move on down to the next row for this next step. And what I'm going to do is add those 2 numbers underneath my radical sign. So I've got 9 plus 16, which is 25. So I have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 25, all of that divided by 4. So we've simplified. Now I need to actually take the square root of 25. If you don't know what that is, go ahead and use your calculator. It is 5. So this is equal to negative 3 plus or minus 5, all divided by 4. And remember, when you take the square root of 25, the square root sign is gone. And now we can break this apart into our 2 different problems. The first problem would be negative 3 plus 5 divided by 4. And the second equation would be negative 3 minus 5 divided by 4. So you break up the plus or the minus sign. Okay, so now if I'm simplifying this, negative 3 plus 5 is positive 2 divided by 4. And if from there that you put your answers 2, you've got it wrong. This is telling us 2 divided by 4, which math enter, is 1/2. Okay, negative 3 minus 5 equals a negative 8 across the top divided by 4. So that would be negative 2. So when I put my answers together, I've got a negative 2 and a positive 1/2. Let's do one more example. Number 3. Okay, I always like to start by writing ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 and identifying my a, b, and c values. Well, my a is the number in front of the x squared, which is 6. My b is the number in front of the regular x, which in this case is negative 3. And my c value is the constant, the number without the letter. That one is 7. Okay. Now I'm going to rewrite the formula just so that I have it right here so that you can see it. You don't need to copy this. So it goes negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I like to do that just so that you can see it as I'm going. So I have negative my b value plus or minus the square root of b squared, so parentheses squared, minus 4 times a times c. This whole thing divided by 2 times a. Okay, let's plug in our values. Now this first thing, it has b right here. Well, my b value is negative 3. B goes here too, negative 3. My a value is the next blank, that is 6. Then my c value is 7. On the bottom row, I have 2 times a. Well, my a value is going to be positive 6. Okay, so after we've done that, now we need to simplify this in our next step. Is right here, double negatives. That means we actually have a positive 3 in front, plus or minus the square root. Well, make sure that whenever you simplify this, you either put parentheses around it, or you type it as negative 3 times negative 3, which ends up giving us positive 9. So now I've got 9 right here. And if I type in the rest, I've got a negative 4 times 6 times 7, which gives me negative 168. And this is all divided by 2 times 6, which is 12. Okay, so now that I've gotten that far, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to simplify what's underneath my square root sign. So I do 9 minus 168, which is negative 159. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 159, all of this divided by 12. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to try to take the square root of a negative 159 and see what happens to you when you do that. You get this, error. That is a non-real answer, okay? Now, why did that happen? Well, remember what I said about the square root. That means what number times itself would give you this number. Well, if I've got a negative under here, I couldn't do something like this. I can't have a positive times a positive number. Okay, it would have to be times itself to give us negative 159. That's not possible. Even if you multiplied 2 negative numbers together, a negative times a negative is also positive. So there's no way for us to multiply the same number times itself and get a negative answer. So when this happens to you, I want you to make this note. It is because we've got a negative under square root sign. Here's what that means. If you've got a negative number underneath your square root sign, that means that you have no real solution. Now, in Algebra 2, you get to learn about something called imaginary solutions, but that is not your problem just yet. Now, I do want to show you what this would look like if I graphed it, because I want you to understand why it doesn't have any solutions. If I graph this, you can see a little bit of my quadratic right up there at the top, which means the arrows are going up, so they are never going to cross the x-axis, so we don't have any x-intercepts or solutions. Okay, so now that you've done the first part of the notes, you need to do problems 1 through 4 on the assignment. After you've done those 4 questions, then watch the next video, because the next notes video is going to add on some more stuff to what we've already learned today.